I'm Brandi Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, we'll recap key moments from the debates for governor, attorney general, and superintendent of public instruction. Plus, the state website that tracks educational outcomes has quietly made some changes to their metrics. We'll explain. And Zach Abraham will join us to help make sense of the rate cut and what it means for the economy in the short and long term. That and more coming up today on Undivided. Remember, you can support our show for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. Hello and welcome to Undivided for our final live show of the week. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Woo, day full of debates yesterday. Man, if you're a political nerd, it was awesome. I actually, after our live show yesterday, I flew over to Spokane so I could watch the gubernatorial debate in person. So much funner with an audience. I'll say we weren't behaving. I'm going to be honest. I kind of felt bad for the moderators because I've been in that position, but we were cheering for Dave and just having a great time. And the moderator's like, please refrain from cheering. And I was like, nah, I've had a glass of champagne. So if you heard me cheering, that was fueled by just a single glass of champagne. That's really all it takes for these days. But obviously we want to go through, on a serious note, sort of some of the key moments, not only in the debate for governor, we're also going to play some highlights from the debate for attorney general and the debate for superintendent of public instruction. There was also a debate yesterday in the race for lands commissioner, which we're not going to fit in today, but I think we can talk a little bit about it next week, because certainly there's a lot of environmental issues at play, and we know how much lying goes on there, so we'll have to see how that went. But let's start with the gubernatorial debate. One thing I really loved about this debate format, and let me just say for the record, Dave did exceptionally better than he did during the first debate. Clearly the nerves had worn off. And I also think having an audience there played to his strengths. And so the just format rules of the debate were good for Dave. He had a wonderful night, in my opinion. And I asked you guys in our daily subscriber show poll who you think won the debate. We'll get to that later on in the show. If you haven't watched the debate, maybe you can decide after these clips. But one of the things I really liked about this is they gave the candidates an opportunity to ask each other questions, which I love, because the questions they choose also tells you a lot about the candidate and what kind of question they choose and what their priorities are. But Dave asked Bob a great question that Bob has no answer for, because there's no way that Bob can run on his track record on public safety or on substance abuse. Those are his weakest spots. He's been the state's chief law enforcer for 12 years. Crime has gotten worse. Murders are up. He pushed lawmakers to decriminalize fentanyl in the middle of an overdose crisis. So naturally, Dave is going to focus in on that. So here's the exchange. It's fairly long, but I want to play Dave's question, Bob's answer, and Dave's rebuttal. Here it is.
Bob, first you were on the King County Council where you raised taxes by $1 billion. Now the tax burden for families is higher than ever. Then you became Attorney General. And during your 12 years as the state's chief law enforcer, crime has skyrocketed, murders have more than doubled, the drug crisis has gotten deadlier after you urged lawmakers to decriminalize fentanyl. If you're not responsible for any of this, Bob, who is?
Thanks for that question. First, just on that previous question, hear carefully what he said. Almost exactly the same law, right? He's acknowledging what he did back in Congress. Number two, look, my record when it comes to balanced budgets that are bipartisan is very clear. I was a budget chair at the King County Council. Look, it's not the size of a state budget, I get that, but it's still a multi-billion-dollar budget. Democrats had a one-vote majority on the King County Council when I chaired the budget committees. How do we put that budget together? I'll tell you, Dave. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, we locked ourselves in a room for a couple weeks, and we hammered out the details of that budget and took it to the full council. Guess what happened? Strong bipartisan support from members of both parties to adopt a bipartisan budget. Public safety, thanks for bringing that up. As Attorney General, I work with local prosecutors. We've already covered sexually violent predators. They send their cases to me there. Guess what else? As Attorney General, I don't actually have the legal authority to prosecute a case if someone breaks into your car. That's your local prosecutor. But we have a criminal division because prosecutors can ask my team to take a case if they have a conflict or lack the resources, for example, to bring a murder case. And guess what they do? Both Republican prosecutors who endorse my opponent and Democratic prosecutors who endorse me, they send their toughest cases to me and my team. Why? Because they know Dave will use the rule of law to hold folks accountable and stand up for victims year after year, county after county, case after case. You may want to belittle those hardworking folks. I value them.
That is time. Mr. Reichert, 60 seconds.
Well, first of all, I don't think you answered the question. Like I asked you, who's responsible? You've been there 12 years. Are you responsible, Bob? Answer the question, please. Are you responsible? If you're not responsible, who is? Who do we look to for leadership if no one takes responsibility? I took responsibility when I was the sheriff. I had to make some tough decisions, life and death decisions, when I was a deputy, when I was the sheriff of King County. I made tough decisions. And when the people asked me about it, I answered the question. Yes, I'm responsible. And you know, all he did was talk about his budget, how great he was at budgeting. A $1 billion tax increase in 8 years in King County by itself? That's crazy.
Oh, I thought that was a great moment. And Bob wouldn't look at him when he's like, answer the question. And he can say that in this context because he did have it was his question he got to ask. And Bob not only wouldn't look at him when he's saying that, he's looking at the moderator, the key moderators over this side, and he's looking at him like, what, is he going to save you from this? But he can't answer it. He absolutely cannot answer that question because either he distances himself from responsibility, which he tried to do a little bit by saying, well, my office doesn't do those kinds of cases, but that makes him look like he's not a good leader. But also you're the state's chief law enforcer. You advocated for things like decriminalizing drugs. And we know drugs are driving a lot of the crime crisis that we see, from nonviolent crimes, but property crimes, thefts, etc., to violent crimes and gang wars and turf wars. So you can't distance yourself from that. I thought it was a very strong moment for Dave. Now, on the back end of that, Bob Ferguson got like 30 seconds to do a final rebuttal, and he didn't answer for anything that Dave Reichert was asking him about. And he brought up this issue of additional funding for police officers. Here it is.
So Washington State has per capita the lowest number of law enforcement officers of any state in the country. My criminal justice plan details how we're going to change that. In my first budget as governor, we're going to put together a budget that invests $100 million. So local jurisdictions, your cities, your counties, the folks who hire most of the police officers across our state can use those dollars for increased salaries, for signing bonuses. That gets first responders on the streets. That helps solve crimes and lets the prosecutors in my team, in my office, do the work to send those folks away.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a lot of things I want to say about that. I'm debating how big of a rant, how angry of a rant I go on today. What do you think? Still blowing the winds? Yeah, let's act pissed off because I really am. So here's the thing. Bob believes that he can throw money at this issue and it's going to get better. He just fundamentally misunderstands what's going on. He fundamentally does not understand why we have the lowest number of police officers per capita of any state in the nation. He believes it's a pay problem. Look, I think that law enforcement officers should be well paid, and guess what? They are. If you look at, you have some Seattle police officers who are making over $200,000 a year. You have some state patrolmen who are making over $200,000 a year. We pay our law enforcement officers in this state very, very well. That is not the problem. And if you took the time to talk to any law enforcement entity in this state, any police union in this state, that is not even going to be at the top of their list. There might be some benefit issues that they want to talk about, especially as they get closer to retirement, but that is not going to be in the top 5 things that they need in order to recruit and retain good law enforcement officers. It's respect. It's respect for the difficult job that they're doing. It's the belief that the attorney general or that their boss isn't going to advocate for them to be politically pursued and prosecuted and put in prison if they do their jobs and in a split-second life or death moment make a decision that might be not quite in line with policy. They want to know that they're not going to have someone like Bob Ferguson, who has prosecuted more police officers than he's ever hired. He's hired 0 police officers. He's prosecuted more than 4. So they want to know that they have someone who has their back when they do their jobs in good faith. And Bob Ferguson is not that person. Jay Inslee has not been that person. There's a reason why Jay Inslee was hardly ever invited to the funerals of fallen police officers. because they don't respect him. They don't respect his policies because his policies don't respect them and don't respect the sacrifice. And Bob Ferguson, he takes to Twitter after the debate, says, I'll create a $100 million grant program to help local governments hire more well-trained police officers. Dave Reichert is trying to distract you from the fact that he opposes pay raises for police officers. Supporting law enforcement means investing in law enforcement. How dare you? First of all, Dave Reichert has never said that he opposes pay raises for police officers. He's just made the point that I've made right now, that law enforcement officers are well paid in our state. Same with teachers. Just like he said, the problem in our education system isn't the pay for teachers, it's our priorities. It's the messaging from the top down. Dave Reichert understands that law enforcement officers, their biggest problem isn't pay. Their biggest problem is a lack of respect from the people who they work for, people like Bob Ferguson. And it speaks volumes about Bob Ferguson that he believes that throwing money at this problem is the answer. You cannot buy their dignity. You cannot buy their loyalty. And you cannot put a price on their lives. And I'll just say, and I don't know, this is where I was like, how angry do I get today? So Dave Reichert told me, I didn't ask him if I could share this. I saw him after the debate. You know what he told me? He told me that the Troopers Union decided to stay neutral in the race for governor. The union that represents our Washington State Patrol troopers decided to stay neutral in the race for governor. That is, not endorse Dave Reichert and not endorse Bob Ferguson. Look, you guys know I respect you. You know I respect the men and women of law enforcement. I have had your back at times where it's been very difficult to, at times where I've been personally attacked for having your back. It's a shameful position to take. It's a shameful position to take. You have troopers that would be alive today. Trooper Christopher Gadd, he'd be alive today if it weren't for the policies of people like Bob Ferguson, if it weren't for the policies of people like Jay Inslee. And I get it. You're worried about retribution. I get it that if Bob Ferguson is elected governor, which is very possible, that he's going to be your boss. But how much more could he hate you than he does already? How much more could he disrespect you than he does already? This is a man who politically prosecutes police officers for fun. And so I understand that he has a reputation about holding grudges. And that as a troopers union, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, man, if he's elected, we don't want him to, hurt our contract negotiations or make our lives miserable. He's going to do it anyway. He hates police officers. He has shown that over the course of 12 years. That's who he is. But again, I go back to, it's a life or death situation. For your men and women who are out on the streets every single day, you have someone like Bob Ferguson, who never said, he didn't say jack shit when you had lawmakers of his own political party who rolled back police pursuits. You know what agency that impacted the most? The agency that's out there patrolling our highways, the Washington State Patrol. He didn't say anything about it. When did he finally speak up about it? Just this year, when it became clear that an initiative to roll back those policies and those restrictions was going to be successful. And he was running for governor and he said, which way are the political winds blowing? Oh yeah, I never supported the rollback in police pursuits. Never did. I thought that was a bad policy. It was dangerous for our communities. It was dangerous for law enforcement. He took a position after 3 years, didn't say anything in 2021, didn't say anything in 2022, didn't say anything in 2023. And then in 2024, he gets on the news and said, I never supported that. I am a public safety candidate. Bullshit, you're a public safety candidate. And so yes, for the Troopers Union, I think it's a shameful and cowardly position to take. And I don't like to use cowardly and refer to it in our law enforcement. I don't believe our state troopers are cowards. But I believe this was a political calculation to say, we don't want to anger him if he's the governor. But this is a life or death situation, quite literally, for the men and women of the state patrol and for the other law enforcement agencies in our state. And to sit it out and say no opinion when you're talking about someone who has a 40-year track record of having the back of our men and women in uniform at a time when we have a public safety crisis on our hands, and you say we're going to sit this one out because you're scared what he might do? Forgive me if I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that. And I realize that I'm not the one who puts on the uniform every day and goes out there and has to deal with the political implications of the job. I realize I'm not the one who's going out there every day and putting my life on the line and who has to decide, well, is Bob Ferguson going to be mad? Is he going to do things as governor because we didn't endorse him or we endorsed his opponent that's going to make my life more difficult? Could it get any more difficult than it is already? Could it get any worse than it is already? down hundreds of troopers. And by the way, did he ever stick up for the men and women of the State Patrol who were fired over the vaccine mandate? Never did. Down hundreds of Seattle police officers. Did he ever speak up during the police defunding debate that pushed them out the door? Never did. Never said anything. Did he say anything when Seattle police cars were on fire in the middle of downtown Seattle in the summer of 2020? Never said anything. Never said a word. Did he say anything when rioters took over an entire police precinct and rendered it useless for an entire neighborhood in the state's largest city? Never said anything. Never said a word. And you're going to stay neutral. That's the decision you make. I think it's a shameful decision. That's where I stand. I understand that you have implications and you have considerations that you're making that are political. But we put our ass on the line every single day, not in the way you do. Certainly, I don't want to compare it at all. You don't think that I'm worried and that Nicole's worried and that other people who have stood up to Bob Ferguson aren't worried about the ramifications if he's elected governor? I think about it every day. Look what he did to Tim Eyman. He ruined Tim Eyman's life. He spent more money going after Tim Eyman than the state is ever going to get from Tim Eyman. All because Tim Eyman pushed initiatives that Democrats didn't like. He ruined his life. Look what he did to the Tacoma police officers. Cleared in internal investigations. But he decided to put them on trial for murder because it was the politically palatable thing to do. So you have all these people who are making difficult decisions to support someone who can help save the lives of our law enforcement officers, who can help turn around the public safety crisis. And they're doing it in spite of the risks. State troopers, man, you put your lives on the line every day, and you can't sit in a boardroom as union representatives and take a risk that involves endorsing a political candidate. It's beyond my comprehension, and it's really disappointing. And that's the rant I wanted to go on today. What were we doing? Oh, we were talking about the debate for governor. Let's get back to that, shall we? One of the moments I thought just really stood out is they asked about DEI, which I'm kind of surprised about. In like a mainstream debate that they'd bring up DEI, right? And I thought Dave Reichert's answer to the DEI question was phenomenal.
I really am struggling with this because I really think that we all need to treat each other with respect and dignity. And that should be taught in our schools no matter what. Do we really need a curriculum to teach people how to relate to each other, be kind to each other, respect each other, no matter of color, race, creed, or religion? So no, I don't agree with DEI, but I do agree with treating people with respect and hiring the best people. That's what I did when I was the sheriff. I had an all-female staff, chiefs and majors, and the commander of my internal investigation unit. Why? Not because of their color, not because of their sex, but because they were the most qualified people.
You mentioned words, Dave, about treating everybody with dignity and respect, and I just can't help but point out that, once again, on audio, in a meeting which you were behind closed doors, but now you can listen to on ReichertRevealed.com, you expressed your opposition to marriage equality. You said marriage is only between a man and a woman, and I'm sorry, but that stings for our LGBTQ Washingtonians. And I want those individuals to know that they have a choice of a governor who supports their freedom to marry the person they love, just like I could marry my wife, Colleen. I defend that freedom. Dave, you oppose it.
That's another lie. I happen to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's my faith. But that doesn't mean I'm going to impose that on the people of Washington State. You have the right to choose who you love. You have that right. And I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm not going to impose my religion on you. But where was Bob when we talk about DEI, when we talk about equality? Where was Bob when the ugly head of anti-Semitism raised up on the university campus
Hell
in
yeah.
Washington State?
Get him,
Where
Dave.
was Bob? Where was Bob's voice? You didn't hear a peep out of Bob.
That is your time.
He
Back to
talks
the panel,
about
please.
equality.
Mr.
I'm
Ferguson.
telling the truth.
And I'm telling the truth. That was an exceptional moment. And in any of these debates, anti-Semitism hadn't been asked in the previous debate. And so I'm glad that he brought it up because, again, that's another instance of Bob not saying anything when it's his alma mater. Same with Jay Inslee and acting like it's totally okay that you have people, scribbling anti-Semitism all over the walls of historic buildings at UW and taking over the quad. And on the... We discussed this when the audio came out of Dave Reichert saying, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, right? And then he went on to say other things. But of course, Bob Ferguson takes little clips and then he doesn't give anybody the context and he puts them out there on TV. And I'm glad Dave said, that's my religious belief. I'm not going to apologize for my religion. And I think that's what Dave needs to say when abortion is brought up too. I'm pro-life. That's my religion. Because I'd like someone to hold Bob Ferguson accountable for attacks on religion. Because think about this. You know how many Muslim Americans, how many Black Protestants, how many Hispanic Catholics are pro-life and are believe the same thing that Dave just said, that marriage is between a man and a woman, pro-traditional marriage? Do you think Bob would ever attack a Muslim he was on stage with who had that belief? Do you think he'd ever attack a Hispanic Catholic for that belief? Do you ever think he'd attack a Black Protestant for that belief? No, but if it's a white Christian, fair game. And I think that's ridiculous. And I've said on this show before, I'm not a religious person, but I value people's right to have their own religious beliefs. And only, I guess, if they're running for office and they're not pushing those beliefs on other people through policy. And Dave has made it clear on the abortion front, on the marriage front, he has no intention of doing that, but he's not going to check his religion at the door. I mean, how religious of a person can you be if you say, well, I'm going to completely disassociate myself from the religion I've had my entire life and it's not going to, inform anything about me? Of course it is. But it shouldn't inform policy decisions that impact other people's lives. So Bob needs to be held accountable for attacking religion because he'd never do it if it was Muslim. He'd never do it if it was a Black Protestant. He'd never do it if it was a Hispanic Catholic. Bottom line. You know what word wasn't said one time last night? Nicole, did you notice as you were watching?
Oh, yeah.
I was at the debate. Nicole was texting from home.
Yep.
What word was it?
Well, it was the name.
Trump. So Bob Ferguson lost it about Donald Trump during the first debate. It's all he talked about. But I think that Dave Reichert's retort to it during the first debate, I didn't think the first debate was great for Dave, but one thing he did well is he quashed the Trump issue. He just kept saying, you're obsessed with him. You are so obsessed with Donald Trump, you can't focus on the state of Washington. And I think that was so effective that Bob Ferguson's camp made a calculation, because what was interesting is, so right before the debate, he's tweeting about Donald Trump. He's tweeting about how, Dave Reichert is basically Donald Trump, loves Donald Trump's policies. He tweets out this picture of him that has a Photoshop picture of a MAGA hat on him, which is just childish and weird. So he's doing that before the debate. So I'm thinking going into the debate, oh my gosh, he's not going to drop this Trump thing. So I hope Dave continues to say, you're obsessed with Donald Trump. I'm obsessed with fixing the state, because I think it makes Bob Ferguson look like he has whacked priorities. So anyway, the debate happens. Doesn't say Donald Trump once. Not one time. Even the Seattle Times noticed it. It was in their headline recap of the debate. So more than a dozen times during the first debate, this is one of his key attack lines. Abortion Trump, abortion Trump, abortion Trump, abortion Trump. Talks a lot about abortion. He really went heavy on abortion in the second debate. Not a word about Trump. But it's not like he's abandoned it, because after the debate, he tweeted about Trump a bajillion times. Reichert and Trump. So he tweets about it, doesn't mention it during the debate, despite ample opportunity to do so, and then goes right back in on comparing Dave Reichert to Donald Trump. And I believe it's because he knew that Dave's retort to that was just too effective in a debate setting. To paint him as so obsessed with Donald Trump, well, we have all these other issues that are going on in Washington state, and someone who's going to obsess over Donald Trump for 4 more years if he wins the presidency. But on social media, he's like, well, Dave can't respond to my tweets in the same way. I mean, he could. He should retweet them and say, obsessed, 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 literally obsessed. So anyway, make sure you answer our poll on Patreon Locals and X about who you think won the gubernatorial debate. Obviously, you know who I think won. But I had a hell of a good time. I really did. And it's so fun to be in the actual debate setting. And I do miss moderating debates, though. It's one of the only things I miss from my previous job in mainstream news is I got to moderate gubernatorial debates and Senate debates. And I love doing that. And I thought the moderators last night did a great job, even though we in the audience were a little unruly. I thought they did a pretty good job at keeping things on track and asking fair questions. Before I get to some clips from the AG debate, somebody asked me, do I have a cold? No, I've had this sinus issue ever since I got inundated with wildfire smoke on vacation this weekend. But I told Nicole, I said, it feels like it's clearing up a lot. It was like kind of painful. And I think it's probably like a sinus infection from the wildfire smoke. But I was like, it feels better. But somebody said you sound still like you got
you still sound a little stuffy, yeah. But I'm just glad you feel better because you didn't
Well, it's
feel
not
good the
painful
first
anymore.
day.
It was genuinely painful. I thought I had like a deviated septum or something. But I feel fine. Other than this, I feel great. That's it.
It's a sexy voice, right?
So sexy, sultry.
Sexy. Cold voice.
Isn't that what you come here for, is the sultry voice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I could put some Vicks vapor rub under here and we can get real saucy. All right, let's talk about the Attorney General race. I realize it's going to be a long show today. I can already see that it's stacking up in that way. And I have some law enforcement people who aren't happy with me for my rant. Listen, I have been your biggest advocate in the media for 15 years. And if occasionally I have a criticism, sue me. All right. So the Attorney General debate between Pete Serrano and Nick Brown. This is a key race. We've had Pete Serrano in, and actually Nick Brown is going to be coming in a couple weeks to do an interview with us. So I look forward to that. So there was this interesting exchange. Again, they had an opportunity to ask each other questions, which I think is great. But the conversation came up about consumer protections, and Pete Serrano kept mentioning the current Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, to which Nick Brown, I think, rightfully retorts, well, you're not running against Bob, you're running against me, but then Pete had him dead to rights. Watch.
But we've also seen the Attorney General that's been caught, with some backdoor deals, advising the UTC and PSC on some of the natural gas issues. Why wasn't he more vocal about protecting the consumer there? Was it because the headline wasn't as good as getting chicken and tuna checks? I don't know. I'm not Bob Ferguson. Maybe that's a question to ask tonight. But the difference here is I will be looking out for the consumer, but I will do so in a way that I advise the agencies to make sure that your all businesses can continue in Washington.
Ms. Brown?
I'm going to try to keep track today about how many times Pete mentions Bob Ferguson. You're not running against Bob Ferguson, you're running against me. And we should focus on the differences between you and I and the experience that we bring to bear.
In 30 seconds.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll just counter back. The only reason I raised Bob Ferguson is Nick said he's got a great legacy to uphold.
Yeah, it's kind of when you and Nick Brown did say that. He said that Bob Ferguson has a good legacy and he wants to uphold it or advance it or whatever. So when you have tied yourself to the current Attorney General, I think that it's fair game to look at that Attorney General's policies and say, well, you think he's doing a good job and you want to keep up that good work. So yeah, you're going to have to answer for some of the things that Attorney General Bob Ferguson has done. And that's the danger when you're endorsed by the incumbent or when you've aligned yourself politically with the incumbent. And similar for Bob Ferguson in the race for governor. I mean, he's been endorsed by Jay Inslee. Jay Inslee came out when he said he wasn't running again and said he looks forward to handing the keys off to Bob Ferguson. And Bob Ferguson hasn't disagreed with anything that Jay Inslee has done. And now he wants to say he's a change agent. It's like, well, okay. If you think the state needs change so badly, then you must think that Jay Inslee hasn't done such a good job for 12 years. Why don't you tell us more about that? Now, there was one video that Pete Serrano put out and that some pro-Pete Serrano people put out that I just watched and I thought, oh, no, I kind of agree with Nick Brown on this. So I hate to break Pete's heart on it, but I'll play the video and then talk about it on the back end.
One of the things that you've said in an NPR affiliate, it was KNKX, when you were the chief legal enforcement officer of the Western District of Washington, is that when you looked at sentencing with your team, that you would use the least amount of sentencing available. You've mentioned our fentanyl crisis, our high crime that's rising, and whether or not you like it, Bob Ferguson's done very little. How can you move away from that position?
Well, I'm really glad that you've asked that question because it demonstrates, once again, your total lack of experience around public safety and criminal justice issues. And you also misquoted me. What I said there is that as a leader, as a prosecutor, we should be advocating for the lowest possible sentence necessary to keep people safe. And if anybody thinks that we should advocate for more than is necessary, then I just have a fundamental disagreement with you.
Look, in principle, I agree with what Nick Brown is saying. We don't want a government or a judicial system that is trying to put people in prison for longer than their sentence demand, or longer than their crime demands. So I think that's what he's getting at there. The issue comes into play, and so there's some nuance to this. Fundamentally, if I thought everyone in the judicial system was acting in good faith, I agree with Nick Brown. The issue is that not a lot of people in our judicial system are acting in good faith right now. I mean, how many cases have we covered? You know, the case down in Tacoma where you've got someone who murders their ex-girlfriend in cold blood, and then prosecutors give him a sweetheart plea deal without consulting the family, and they get rid of his 5-year mandatory firearm enhancement. So we see all these instances where you have sentences that are so far to the bottom of the standard range. It's insane. And so, you know, a sentence that's long enough to keep the public safe, it's in the eye of the beholder. And we have way too many prosecutors who are doling out sweetheart plea deals in order to clear their plate and move on to the next case and move on to the next case. And what they're doing is not in the interest of justice whatsoever. So of course, I don't want someone sentenced above and beyond what the law says their crime dictates. But when you have someone, for instance, the 8-time felon who murdered Ruth Dalton, the elderly dog walker, trying to carjack her, ran her over, left her for dead in the street, stabbed her little dog to death and threw it in the garbage can. 8-time felon, one of his felonies that he committed while he was behind bars was pled down so it wasn't a strikeable offense. Had it not been pled down, 3 strikes, you're out, he would have been in prison for the rest of his life. But instead, he got released to a apartment in Seattle that the taxpayers were helping fund, and then he murdered Ruth Dalton. So in theory, I agree with Nick Brown. In practice, I don't think that Nick Brown's vision of the judicial system is what's happening in reality. So that's my thought on that. All right. Coming up next, we talk a lot about the state educational system and the report card, right? What it shows for proficiency in English, math, and science. And these are figures that we bring up often when we criticize our state's public education system because kids are failing across the board. The test scores are terrible. Well, quietly behind the scenes, the state of Washington has changed those test scores. We're going to talk about why. First, if you're in the market to sell your home, we're going to talk about rate cuts later on in the show today, so we'll see what that does to mortgage rates and to the housing market. Check out a few real estate agents. I know there's a ton out there, but do not choose one. Promise me you won't choose one until you've talked to our friend Wes Jones at sellwithwes.com. He and his team have an innovative marketing strategy to make sure they get the most possible eyeballs on your listing. And part of that has to do with their staging. It is beautiful. Sharona Rhodes, when her and her husband went to sell their home, they took advantage of Wes Jones and his team's staging. And she said it was so beautiful, her daughter could hardly recognize their house.
So now it's, okay, the house is empty and you're seeing all the things that you've never really noticed. Like, oh my goodness, there's a broken baseboard over there. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, that looks terrible. And he's like, calm down. Staging will take care of it. Just don't worry about it. They came in and they staged everything. And my 17-year-old daughter just graduated high school. So we went in to look at the house after the stage and she said, Mom, I would buy this house. You've always hated our house. She said, this house is aesthetic. I love this house. Like, okay, 17-year-old child.
And the staging helped Wes sell their home in 6 days for over list price. And you saw the images there if you're watching the show today, not listening. It looked absolutely beautiful in the staging. So check out Wes Jones, sellwithwes.com. Sellwithwes.com. He'll start by giving you a free market analysis. Sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, the state seems to be changing its online report card system to make it seem like test scores aren't so terrible. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. All right, we mentioned there was also a debate in what I think is one of the most important races happening in the state of Washington this cycle, and that is the race for office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Kruse is the 2-term incumbent who's running, and frankly, who even a lot of Democrats have acknowledged has not done a good job when it comes to educational outcomes, enrollment is declining, etc. But his opponent, David Olson, God forbid you have someone who doesn't want to teach DEI in classes. God forbid you have someone who thinks that maybe we should be preparing more kids to go into the trades than to go to 4 universities. Can't have that. So let's stick with the guy who has put test scores in the toilet and who doesn't care about declining enrollment and wants to cut parents out of their kids' lives. So I digress. But anyway, there was a debate in that. There was one issue that was talked about that might have sounded a little confusing if you weren't familiar with what was going on behind the scenes. So I want to play the clip, and then I'm going to explain to you what's happening.
Our new annual assessments just came out last week, and it shows that we did not improve overall year over year. And if you do a deeper dive into the assessment that just came out, it shows a huge disparity in our students of color, Native Americans, and students with disability. It just came out on the OSPI website. Tellingly on that website, though, in past years, they showed students that were meeting grade level. But when the needle's not moving in the right direction, my opponent moves the goalpost. So now the reporting on the OSPI website now shows students at level 2 that are meeting foundational, it's gobbledygook of words, but he's now rolling it up to make it look like the state is doing a lot better than it really is. So when you get criticized by me, criticized by my former opponent, criticized by NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Programs, and the Seattle Times, then something's wrong. You don't move the goalpost. You work to fix it.
Our test data has been absolutely misrepresented. A 3 and a 4 on our 1 through 4 scale means you are achieving college and university admissions readiness. And when you go to that university, go Cougs, go Dogs, go Eagles, go name it, you won't need a below 100 level course. That's what a 3 and a 4 means. But a 2 on that assessment has always meant grade level. And the misinformation is meant to make people afraid, to make them angry and make them frustrated, because he wants to sell you on more privatization.
I certainly don't use any of my words for fear-mongering. I just look at the data that's on our own website and look at the data on the National Assessment of Educational Programs that shows us number 27 in the nation. My opponent says we're number 2, and for the last couple of months I've been saying, where's he pulling the rabbit out of that hat? Because the data is not showing that we're number 2 in the nation, we're number 27.
Yeah, you can manipulate the data to do and show anything that you want these days. One thing I'll just say before I dive into what they're talking about here is we did an hour-long interview with David Olson. We just posted it on Patreon and Locals a couple days ago. I highly recommend it. It has no paywall. We don't put paywalls on our subscriber or on our candidate interviews. Please go watch the whole thing. It's the best I've heard him. He did a phenomenal job. I don't know how you could be a parent, watch his interview, and vote for Chris Reykdal. So please go check that out. So here's what's going on. So let's go back in time a little bit. As of last week, if you were to go to the state website and the OSPI report card for all public schools in the state of Washington, this is what you would have seen. So you would have seen a couple different data sets on there. So student enrollment, attendance rates, and then the big one, you would have seen test scores or proficiency ratings. And it would have said, this is from about a week ago, that only 50.7% were meeting ELA standards, 39% were meeting math standards, and 43% were meeting science standards. And that's pretty easy to understand, right? And it paints a pretty dire picture of our state's education system. So that's what it looked like a week ago. Then quietly, at some point late last week, they changed that. So if you go to that same page now, this is what it's going to look like. It's still going to have those really low figures, but it characterizes it different. It said this is students on track for college level learning without needing remedial classes. And then it adds this second subset that it's never had on there before, where the test scores look way higher. It's like, 71% ELA, 63% math, 62% science. And it says those are students showing foundational grade level knowledge and skills or above. So that's interesting. So again, just looking before or after, so one pulled from a week ago, one pulled from this week, and the difference that it shows. So before, it just characterized it as meeting ELA standards, meeting math standards, meeting science standards. And now for those same test scores, there are a couple points off because it changes over time, right? It says students on track for college level learning without needing remedial classes. So those are two very different sounding things, right? Either you're meeting standards or you're not. So have they updated, changed the metrics? What is it? Or do they just want to bifurcate it in that way? Nicole, can you go back to the new report card? Do they just want to bifurcate it in that way because they want to have a data set showing that shows something that's not failure? And that's what I see there. Is I'm not saying that they're now changing the metrics or misrepresenting metrics, but they clearly don't want it to continue to show that so few of their students are college ready, which what is the point of high school? It's to get you ready for further education, to get you ready for college, or to get you ready for the workforce. So it's showing previously that very few students were meeting standards. And now they want to say, well, let's just pull out, let's split those up. So yeah, only 50% are ELA, but those are for students who are ready for college level learning. So we don't expect that percentage to be high, but the students who are showing foundational grade level knowledge and skills, those are much higher. So this is very clear to me what's going on. It's that test scores haven't been great. Chris Rakedall's probably sick of, during his election, having everyone reference the fact that like only half of kids are proficient in ELA and math and science. So they're like, how can we split these apart to give us a higher data set so we can have some ammunition to fire back against those claims? Nicole did send an email to OSPI asking about this change in metrics, and they sent us a lengthy email. I'm only going to read part of it, which I think, describes their motivation here, because they say, well, we didn't change the metrics. We've always been using these metrics. We just didn't, post them on our site, essentially. And what I want to say before I read this is going back to Chris Rakedall. He was saying, well, our data has been misrepresented. It's like, okay, but you're in charge of the data that goes on the website. So if you feel like it was being misrepresented, like, why did you allow it to be misrepresented? I don't understand. But they said in this response to us, the chief communications officer, across all of the states that make up the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, we are all seeing a narrative persist that conflates proficiency with being on grade level or even simply knowing how to read or do basic math. These narratives are not accurate, and unfortunately, our prior labels on report card were not helping to correct this misinformation. We aren't going to stop publishing the percentage of students who earned levels 3 and 4. Those data sets also tell us an important story about university level readiness, and we are required to report the data to the U.S. Department of Education. But this is part of a broader effort to get the media, the public, and the policymakers to stop conflating that number with a student being on grade level. So that tells me that it is a direct response to negative news stories about learning and about the quality of education. And they're admitting it, that it is a response to that. And they're responding to it while the current head of our public school system is in what's going to be a very tough race to keep his job. Because remember, he performed very poorly in the primary election. So this is one of those statewide races where David Olson, especially because there's not a party affiliation next to their name, it's a nonpartisan race, where he really has a chance. And I would also point out, Nicole, can you go back to that new report card one again for me? Thank you. I would also point out, even if you're looking at the test scores for students showing foundational grade level, that's like students at the very basic level for their grade, right? Those still aren't great. No, 62% in math?
All
62%
of these
in science?
Numbers are not great because they're not looking deeper into them. Like, I now know how easy it is to graduate even if you're not really meeting these standards, right? Because the testing, they're letting them have notes, they're doing things that they're letting them have the questions beforehand. I mean, some of that stuff was probably going on early, years ago, but to a different extent now. And then on top of that, the graduation rate letting kids graduate whether they are going to school or not, because that 69% that don't even show up for most of the year. Oh, sorry, I bring that back up.
That's a good point, because look at those two data sets next to each other. So 83.6% are graduating in 4 years, yet 69.7% are not attending school regularly.
Right. So they don't even have to go to school and you're graduating.
That is such a good point. I have not even, because we've heard this over and over from parents, that there was a phrase for it that they used during the pandemic about lowering standards and acting like students were still, somebody will remind me of the phrase, but lowering standards, we can't fail kids that show up. How could you fail a kid that shows up or whatever? So they wouldn't give failing grades. So that the actual readiness is far below even these really terrible scores. And then you've got 70% of kids who aren't even attending class regularly. Imagine that, missing 10% of classes or more. Yet you have 84% who are graduating in 4 years.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I know
Great
specific
point.
examples of, I've heard from teachers, via my friends and family that have talked to the teachers, because I don't have kids in school, but I've heard specifically that they say, I mean, he's not ready to go to the next grade, but to, put that
Hold him back.
emotionally on him.
Oh.
Like it's more emotionally damaging than it is,
being 2 years behind
I
and
guess.
being totally out of your depth.
Oh, yeah.
Can you
And I
imagine
mean-
how sad and emotional that would be for a kid?
Exactly. To be failing in front of your students, to not be
Yep.
able to keep up with your classmates. I mean, there's so many aspects that they just dismiss because they want those numbers.
Yeah, and it's 100%. In the middle of an election, you're going to change these metrics. So you can say, oh, it's not 50%, it's 70% that are doing well. Well, the rest of the metrics tell a story. I'm so glad you noticed that, because I've never put those two things together, that like the rest of those metrics tell such a startling story about the lowering standards, about we'll prop up kids for any reason. Well, we know the reason, for political reasons.
Yep.
And then, by the
All
way,
about numbers.
oppose school choice, so that it's so interesting that education has become such a passion topic on the show for us. And we actually we'll talk about more, but we have a special coming up next week on education, because neither of us have kids, but we see it, how nonsensical it is, how political they're making it. And also, all of these political and social issues that find their way into education at a time when our core purpose of education is failing. It's just become, I think, and I see parents struggling, cut out of their kids' education, upset, with no recourse. And so I don't know why we've just started covering it more. And then the school choice issue. And then you have someone like Rakedahl or Bob Ferguson, who oppose school choice.
Right.
Yeah, so they want to force parents who don't have the money to keep their kids in a failing public education system. Because we can't give you a choice, because the teachers union, that would be bad for them, right? But you know what I found out last night that I did not know, or I don't think I knew? So Bob Ferguson's railing, he has this ad we talked about yesterday, right? Where, Dave Reichert thinks teachers are overpaid, which Dave Reichert never said that. Dave Reichert wants to defund our public education system by letting, you know who sends their kids to private school?
Oh, I'm sure I do know.
Bob Ferguson.
Of course he does.
Sends his kids to private school. You guys, Bob Ferguson sends his kids to private school. He's got ads running that cost $500,000 to air, lying about Dave Reichert, saying that public school teachers are overpaid, saying Dave Reichert is going to defund our public education system, talking on the debate stage about how he's against school choice. And he sends his freaking kids to private school. You know how many Washington parents could never afford to send their kid to a private school, but who so desperately want to because they know they'll get better educational outcomes? Bob Ferguson can do it, but at the same time, he's so beholden to the WEA that he's going to force those middle-class families, he's going to force those poor families to keep their kids in an educational system that's failing them.
And I do think that people...
Insane.
I was talking this morning with somebody about the school choice thing and how that should be a bigger topic for OSBI, but really I'm not sure that it can be, because it's got there's got to be so many people in the mix, right?
Yeah.
So OSBI cannot decide on school choice. So you've got to it has to be a full turnaround in leadership around here, because you've got to get the governor, you've got to get all of these people, you've got to get legislators, everybody on board with this, or it'll never happen. And so I do think it needs to be a bigger discussion. And if you would like school choice for your kids in schools to be fixed in this area, then you've got to vote differently everywhere. You have got to realize what these people are responsible for, all of them, not just OSBI in charge of schools. No, it is all of the legislatures, all of the, everybody we put in charge in Washington is responsible for making that happen. And if we can't change the leadership here, it's going to be a real tough battle.
100%. But I think we need to normalize talking about it. And also people will say, well, it'll hurt our public schools if we give school choice or a school voucher. It's like, well, it won't if public schools are performing to a point where parents want to keep their kids there. Then that doesn't hurt public schools. But what you're saying is you want to force, we talk about all the time, it's the two-door choice. It's like you want to lock one door up and not even give it as an option to parents, even though there's like death and destruction behind the other door, because you know that the path through the other door is so bad that if given a choice, they'll choose door number 2. So you're like, well, door number 2 is it's not an option.
It's not an option.
And then what incentive is there to improve public education when you're forcing people to stay there? There's no incentive.
Right.
So
and
it's really a wild issue.
I do have some friends that are homeschooling their kids now, and in no way are they like really ready to homeschool.
No.
I mean, they're just ordering books, they're ordering all these things because they're so scared of our public education system right now that they're like, can't do it anymore, I'm just gonna homeschool. And they're just trying to figure it out. So let me tell you, a lot of people would pick door number 8, like I think Ferguson during the debate said that, then those schools aren't held to the same standards, or aren't forced to be accountable, or whatever it is, the same standards. I'm like, well, people are choosing like 0 standards and just like teaching out of a book at home because they're so
over your standards,
Yes.
right? 100%.
So,
and the same thing applies though to a charter school or to a private school. If your kid's not getting a quality education, you're not going to want them to go there. That's why they're leaving public schools. It's one of the many reasons they're leaving public schools. Maybe they don't want a political or social agenda pushed on their kids. Maybe their schools aren't safe. We've seen that increasingly so with some high schools in Washington State.
And again,
so just ridiculous.
And the difference between, I think, a Reichtel and an Olson right now is accountability, because that's the only thing they can really focus on right now is say, okay, there's these bad numbers, what's happening, and listen to the stories that we bring up. And we're like, yes, it's not all the teachers that are bad, but you've got to weed them out. And right now, the only people that can weed them out is the like superintendent. So they're all self-reporting. So all the schools, like we talk about Olympia all the time, and the only way for OSPI to get involved is for Olympia to say, hey, can you come get involved? Yeah, they're not doing that.
No, Olympia's not going to do that. And in fact, I'll tease it here for the first time, and then we're going crazy late, so we should move on to national. But we are going to have a documentary airing next week on the Olympia School District. And leading up to that, coming up on Sundays with subscribers this week, we're going to be joined by the woman who has done more to expose what's happening inside the Olympia School District than anyone, Alicia Perkins. She went to Olympia. Her husband went through OSD. They sent 3 kids through OSD. And she has been exposing the political and social agenda and indoctrination in that school district. I've called it one of the wokest school districts in the nation. So Alicia Perkins is going to join us this week on Sundays with subscribers. We're also going to have a preview of that documentary on the Olympia School District. So if you have not signed up already to become a subscriber, you should do that now. If you want a preview of that, it's going to be phenomenal. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. You can also hear our conversation with Alicia Perkins about why she's so passionate about exposing what's happening at the Olympia School District, but as a microcosm of what's happening locally with the decline in educational standards and increases in political and social indoctrination of our kids. So that's coming up this Sunday, undividedpod.com. All right, we're going to move on to national coming up next, including Florida Report. First, I've talked about Natchez RV Resort. Yes, if you have an RV and you want to check it out, Natchez still has lots available. You know what else they have available? Turnkey park models. So if you've been thinking, Natchez RV Resort looks sweet, but I don't have an RV, I don't know if we're ready to buy one of those yet, or if that's really what we want. Well, they've got turnkey park models ready to go, and they're absolutely luxurious inside. And that's what Natchez RV Resort is about in general. I mean, it is the epitome of luxury. You're not going to find another RV resort like it. They just opened up their 4,300 square foot clubhouse, indoor outdoor fireplace, gourmet kitchen. It's beautiful. So much space for you and your family and friends and visitors to enjoy. And then a ton of outdoor activities, both on-site and off-site. A lot of recreational opportunities year-round. So check it out. Check out not only the park, if you've got an RV and want to go check out some of their lots, but also these turnkey park models they have available. You can schedule an appointment to see them. NatchezRVResort.com, NatchezRVResort.com. All right, let's skip Gavin again. Sorry, we're going late today. 2 days in a row, I had to Gavin do some story I was going to talk about, but it's a little bit evergreen, so I'll save it for next week. So let's get to our Thursday segment. Every week we check in on what's happening in the Sunshine State with my sister Miranda. It's our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
Not even controversial.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Miranda, hello. A busy news week in Florida.
Isn't it always a busy news week in Florida?
Yeah, it doesn't get much busier than another attempted assassination of the former president. Are you familiar with this golf course and the area around it?
I am. It's actually really close to the West Palm Beach airport. So I've flown in and out of that airport a couple of times. So I'm definitely familiar about where it is. It's not near Mar-a-Lago. It's actually on the west side of the highway. So it's a little bit off the beach area. But
yeah, it just seems stunning to me that, I mean, obviously the failures, but it's like, I was looking at the images and it seems like there's this big part of it that's got like a fence and then these hedges, right? Where this guy was hiding in the hedges. I mean, I just can't imagine not like sweeping bushes
Yeah, and
before-
apparently he'd been sitting there, like cell phone providers said that his phone had been sitting in that area since early hours of the morning.
Yeah.
So you got this guy perched there for 12 hours and nobody, I mean, thankfully somebody did, like they did end up seeing the barrel of the gun apparently,
Yeah.
but the fact that that whole area wasn't swept with like, at this point with canines or something, like I'm pretty surprised that the security hasn't been dialed up a lot.
Yeah, it's insane. Well, I that's why. So the state of Florida, so Ron DeSantis, they're going to just do their own investigation, independent of the Secret Service one.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually something that states normally do anyway, just in case federal charges can't be reached or vice versa. The state can run its own parallel investigation just to make sure like all of the bases are covered. DeSantis says he's pretty adamant on making sure that this guy's held responsible and faces, you know, the proper criminal charges that he should be facing for what he did. So they opened their own investigation this week, and they're going to be, you know, doing all their due diligence to make sure that this guy gets what he's due, I guess.
What's coming. I mean, I trust Florida to investigate it better than the feds, frankly. And so if they can't even keep him safe, I don't trust them to investigate it. And it makes sense because you're going to have the state charges, maybe federal charges, but they can throw the book at him in every which way. So, and you said you're going to be up in that area tomorrow. What, for work?
Yeah, I have two photo shoots up in Palm Beach County tomorrow, and one of them is right in West Palm Beach, which is pretty close to where the golf course is located. So
yeah,
I'll be up in that territory tomorrow. So we'll see if there's any, and it's still there's probably gonna be some like news presence and stuff up there, I'm sure. So
I mean, I hate to say it, but it almost seems like if you can't keep the man safe, if you can't give him the bodies he needs to keep him safe, then you got to tell him he can't golf anymore. Then you got to say, sir, you can't be at these golf courses where there's all this open area. We don't have the manpower to keep you safe. I hate to say that because it's not his fault, right? But I don't know why they don't just do that.
It's true, but he also doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that you can really
Nicole's
tie
shaking
down.
her head. She's like, that ain't gonna work. He's gonna do that anyway. That's not gonna work. Yeah. I gotta ask you about something else. So we talked about these boat parades, right? These Trump boat parades. I'm sure there's been Kamala boat parades. I don't know. And they happen a lot in Florida. They've even happened here, frankly. I think there was some on Lake Union back when he was first running. But you've now seen this clip. So the CNN sends this little reporter out to talk to these Trump boat parade people. And it's just baffling, the disconnect she has. Here's a clip.
What's your most important issue?
The economy, getting the interest rates down, getting it where we can afford to live in America. Right now, it's too expensive.
Okay, now let me maybe ask like a slightly impolite question. But, you know, if you can afford a boat, you're not hurting so bad, right? Because a boat costs a lot of money and it's a lot of upkeep.
Listen, nobody gave me shit. I earned everything that I've got. I'm retired military, retired power plant, and I am successful and retired and with boats, jet skis, because I did it right. And everybody has that chance. Whether they choose or not, that's up to them.
I would never try to take anything away from you in that way. But what I'm asking is, groceries are probably a smaller part of your budget than, say, you know, someone who's like a little worse off. I think it's interesting that people who are a little bit more comfortable are still so concerned about the economy. Did you see what I'm saying?
Because I want my money to go further. I want inflation to go down. I want interest rates to go back down. I want all that. But that covers everybody in the economy. Not just me, not just the poor, not just the rich. It covers everybody.
Now, something I've heard from some people, tell me if this applies to you, is like they're worried their kids aren't able to afford a house or a car.
No. I trained my kids and taught my kids properly. They have great educations, and they're both successful in their careers. Actually, they're doing better than me.
So he like totally schools her. I love that clip so much.
Yeah, same. His response is exactly what my response to that whole line of questioning that she had the kind of audacity to even like say. I would have had the same response because I think like one has nothing to do with the other. You should be allowed to have a boat and affordable groceries. This shouldn't be something you have to have like a trade-off. Like, oh, because you know the economy's bad, let me get rid of everything that I worked hard for. Yeah. Like, that's not how this should work.
Well, and the fact that he has to make the point to her that like, yeah, but if you know, I care about inflation and bringing prices down, and that also helps, people who don't have boats and people who are low income. It's like it helps everyone when inflation is lower. And it's like, is the only people who can be worried about the economy, like very poor people? They're the only ones who have any standing to be worried about the economy. Like, what about the American dream? Like, yeah, we should want people, like rich, poor, otherwise, to continue to work to better their circumstances. So it's like you're telling people, well, don't even think about getting a boat ever. Don't even dream about getting a boat ever, because you should be just laser focused on affording bread. It's like, I just CNN for you, right? Have you seen any Kamala boat parades?
No, I haven't. They did have the golf cart.
Oh, that's right. We talked about they had a golf cart for Florida.
Yeah.
I love it.
We're an outdoor community. We like to dress up our off-road vehicles and our on-water vehicles and share our opinions.
You know what I want to see?
Land or sea.
You know what I want to see? I want to see an alligator parade.
It probably happened. I mean, we just wrapped up our python hunt and they laid them all out. So that's kind of like a python parade, I guess. So.
Just put some signs on the alligators and parade them down. I love it. I think that'd be great. All right, Miranda, stay safe down there. Jeepers creepers.
I will, I promise.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Meow. Yeah, just wild. I mean, seriously, am I wrong to say that they should just tell Trump you can't go golfing?
They should tell him to not do a lot of things.
I know
that
it's
he
not
does. It's
fair,
never gonna work.
But it seems like I'd rather have him live to the election than be angry that the Secret Service won't let him golf anymore.
I mean, I assume he doesn't do lots of things that aren't safe enough. I think that they thought he was safe enough, and now I believe he's got scaled up. It's as big as you can get when you are president.
But it's also, wouldn't you have done that after the first assassination attempt? Wouldn't you have scaled them up that much? It's just insane. I hate to laugh
who's
about
making
it.
those decisions? I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild. So if you're watching economic news today, you'll know that the Fed just made a big old rate cut. So what does it mean? Is it political? Was it necessary? Was it earned? Our friend Zach Abraham with Bulwark Capital joins us to discuss. Zach Abraham, welcome back to Undivided.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We've been waiting for it. Fed cuts interest rates. What do we make of it?
If I hadn't seen the last 15 years, I'd be shocked. I have, so it's not shocking to me. But it's pretty amazing in the sense that the Fed talks so much about being data dependent. And I'll just tell you right now, there's absolutely nothing in the data that justifies a 50 basis point rate cut. There just isn't. So it kind of leads you down a path of asking, okay, so then why'd they do it?
Right.
I think, I hate to speculate and make it political. If people want to read this as the Fed doing whatever they can to help Kamala Harris's campaign, I would say I don't know that that's what's going on, but what I guess the way I would describe it is it's something you can't dismiss, because the debate should have been over this is me just making a comment based on the Fed's own words, right? So we're data dependent, we're data dependent, we're data dependent. If they truly are data dependent, then the debate should have been whether to not cut at all or to go 25 basis points. Where they came up with 50, there's just nothing in the data that suggests that's what they should be doing. As a matter of fact, you've got multiple inflation gauges that have been ticking upwards over the last 3 months. You've got growth and inflation still above the long-term trend lines. You've got unemployment sub 4.5. There's just nothing there. I think they're making a huge policy mistake. And I think that you are watching markets, in my opinion, and look, we'll be talking, God willingly, 6 months from now when we have a clearer picture.
Yeah.
But what I'd be willing to bet at this point is that everything's going way higher and inflation's going to reignite.
Can I ask you, just explain it to me like I'm 4 years old, what the difference between 25 basis points and 50 basis points is? Explain that to me like I'm a child.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is nothing exact about this, right? So if you listen to even guys like me at sometimes, and I'm glad you just asked that question, because in the industry, we can get so hung up. What is the significance of the Fed fund rate, which, to be clear, all the member banks, so like let's say JP Morgan and Bank of America, they have an account at the Federal Reserve Bank, right? And in that account, they hold their reserves, okay? Which reserves are, it's like the seeds of money, if you will. It's not real money, but it is banking reserves, and they can convert it into money through a process, things like that. So the Fed funds rate is the rate of interest that the Federal Reserve pays them on their reserves they hold at the banks. Okay. And so what that acts is sort of is like the foundational interest rate in an economy. Okay. So when you change that by 25 basis points, what is the real world knock-on effects? Yeah. Not much, right? When you change it by 50, it's a little more. It's still not a big deal. But what it's more about is it's more representative in intention and kind of showing you what the powers that be have in mind. And so by going 50, it tells me that they are willing to continue juicing this thing to a point where inflation is almost assuredly coming back. It tells me that they are making rate policy decisions that are not solely based on the data like they're constantly claiming. And it's just not. Unless they're withholding some piece of data that justifies it. So the real world difference, not much. I mean, it might equate to a little bit lower in mortgage rates, but not substantially. Here's the thing that's interesting to me, though, is that we are watching something happen that we've never seen in the history of economics in this country. And that is, you are beginning an aggressive rate hiking cycle. While growth and inflation are currently above the long-term trend, and the government is running record deficits. In an environment, and I'm not predicting this, but in an environment like this, if you told me that the NASDAQ was 50 to 100% higher from 18 months from now, I wouldn't discount it. I wouldn't say it's not possible.
Can I ask you, just because we talk about motivation, right? And I know it's, we're kind of toeing the line, but let's say that their motivation is to help Harris, right? So you're saying, though, that long term, or not in the too distant future, it could send inflation skyrocketing. Well, that doesn't help Harris, right? So what are the immediate benefits to doing this that would help Harris in the next month and a half of the campaign?
I mean, it just gives the media a narrative, right? Look, Harris is getting more and more competitive in the election. The stock market and the economy are cheering for it, right? This is the narrative, right? Stock market and the economy are cheering for it. You better vote Harris. You don't want to lose these market gains. The market's breathing a sigh of relief because Donald Trump doesn't look as likely to win, right? That's the spin they're going to put on it.
Well, Biden's
right?
having a speech today where he's touting this as progress for the economy.
Sure. Yep. And he's going to do that. They're going to juice it. And look, at the end of the day, the better the market and the economy are doing, it's an aid to the incumbent, right? And she is the incumbent. Yeah. So I think it really is that simple. The other thing, and you've seen this over and over in this country, is it's anesthesia, right? We're going to keep pumping out free money. We're going to juice your 401ks, basically to give you anesthesia to ignore the absolute invasion that we see on our southern border, the usurping of federal law, the crackdown on the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, all that kind of stuff, because people vote their pocketbooks, right? And if they think that she's good for their stock market balances, they're probably going to vote that way.
What did they do before 2022? I like that phrase, anesthesia. They said, we'll forgive your student loans. Hey, free money for everyone, right? Worked out well for them. So, all right, Zach. Well, we appreciate it. I know you have your live webinar happening next Thursday, the 26th. And so we'll give people details on that because I'm sure that this leads to a lot of questions about people's retirement portfolios. So you'll have all the info for them next Thursday. People can sign up, knowyourriskradio.com. All right, Zach. Thank you.
All right, ladies. Thanks as always for having me.
Yeah, and a reminder again, Zach's going to have another one of his live Know Your Risk webinars coming up next Thursday, September 26th. It starts at 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, totally free to sign up. Just go to knowyourriskradio.com. There'll be a little pop-up in the screen, knowyourriskradio.com. All right, Nicole, we have something that just happened that's never happened in the history of Undivided. Not once.
Uh-oh.
I don't think. I don't I don't think it's happened. 100% agreement on our daily subscriber show poll.
I don't think that's
that never happens. So across, and that's, I think right now it's like 750 votes of subscribers on Patreon, Locals, and X. I asked, who do you believe won last night's gubernatorial debate? Right now, 100% of subscribers who took our poll on Patreon, Locals, and X say Bob Ferguson. Just kidding. Say Dave Reichert. I'm actually surprised because usually there is some naysayers and stuff. 100%.
Nice.
Man, I love it. Want to move mama says hands down Dave nailed it. Having been captain of my college debate team, I'd have him on my side any day of the week. Compassionate, clear, confident, concise. Great job. And I met this younger boy who was there with his dad, who was on his school's debate team. And I told him, I said, look, Bob Ferguson's a polished debater. He's a good speaker. And we expect that. He's an attorney. He went to Ivy League. He was on the debate team. But there's a difference in debates between polish and relatability, substance, style, all of those things. So polish, 100%. If you're going on who's the technical polished debater, it's Bob Ferguson. But Dave Reichert really came out swinging. He was relatable, and he didn't lie. So that always helps, right? When you're not lying like crazy during a debate. Bill Swick says, truth wins. See, truth wins hands down. I just hope it makes a difference for the voters on the fence and some of them who are progressives. The lies are so blatant. Even his voters should be able to see that. And the thing is it going to make a difference with progressives? No. Apparently they're okay being lied to over and over and him spending millions of dollars to lie to them on TV. But all Dave really needs to win over are the independents, undecided voters in the middle. And to me, having been undecided, in the presidential race not too long ago, being someone who doesn't align 100% with Republicans, I voted for some Democrats in the primary. I just don't know how you can't see these two candidates and say, okay, I'm not going to go with what we've been doing for 40 years. I'm going to try something different. Wingnut says... Okay, maybe this is why it's 100%. I didn't even read the poll. I just saw Ferguson or Reichert as the only options and had to pick Dave. What if I said, who do you hate? And you did that. You need to read before you vote. Tammy T, Dave took the gloves off and called Bob out. S. Blankers says, Dave absolutely was the clear winner. I heard someone on the radio say that if Reichert would have run with a D by his name, he would have taken the primary and would, no question, be our next governor. Yeah, a lot of party line voters. Drives me nuts. Okay, some super chats today. Sally S., $10 super chat. I donated to Reichert's campaign this morning. Let's get Dave across the finish line to beat smarmy, slimy, stinking lion Bob. I actually got a text from my friend Sarah who says that Bob's dishonest ad about education and about teacher pay prompted her to donate to Dave because she was so upset that Bob was lying about Dave wanting or thinking teachers are overpaid. It's good for you. Bill Biz with the $20 super chat. Ferguson, demonstrably a misinformation weasel, would probably be the first to support a Gavin Newsom-style media censorship bill, as long as he was doing the censoring. Yeah, when you're on the receiving end, not so fun, but when you're the one who gets to decide what's misinformation, disinformation, what should be censored, have a blast, right? Baron of Gray Matter, $5 super chat. Oh, God. You won't say it, Brandi, but I will. The Troopers Union is acting chicken shit. They can't stand up for their own good. I won't support them anymore. And look, like I said, I support the troopers. I support the Troopers Union. I understand there are political implications, but with so much at stake, quite literally life or death. I don't think every political race is life or death. I wouldn't say that if I didn't think that was true. There's a trooper who wouldn't have 7 holes in his body if it weren't for the policies of Bob Ferguson and the Inslee administration. And there's a trooper who lost his life and would be alive today if it weren't for the policies of the Inslee administration and by extension, Bob Ferguson. So it is a life or death issue. And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions that there might be ramifications for down the road, politically speaking, but you got to stand up for what's right. And I think this is an instance where every law enforcement entity, every law enforcement union, trade group in the state should be unequivocally siding with Dave Reichert, putting money behind Dave Reichert, out campaigning for Dave Reichert. To do otherwise it's insane for me. I can't quite grasp it. Country Guy, $10 super chat. Swear jar, unions are primarily in the pocket of Dems. Baron of Gray Matter, $2 super chat. Auto Worker Union did the same thing. Although the Teamsters decided not to endorse, which I will say, I don't think that's the same thing because the Teamsters always endorses Democrats and now they're neutral. where law enforcement unions, they should always be endorsing Republicans. The Troopers Association doesn't go out and endorse Democrats, and then all of a sudden it's neutral. They should always be, and usually do when they issue endorsements for Republicans. So why would you now sit it out when you have a solid pro-law enforcement Republican and a Democrat? But at the Teamsters Union, they have decades of history of endorsing Democrats. So I don't think it's the same thing at all. But should they have endorsed the party that actually let them come and speak at the RNC and that would do more for them and workers? Yeah, 100%.
I just think you should, if you're gonna be in the business of making endorsements, then endorse who's going to be better for you. Yeah. And they're choosing to just chicken shit it out.
Wow. Nicole, don't swear on the show.
I know, right? That's only the fifth one today.
Yeah, Rick Eckert, Teller Super Chat. In my city's PD of 23 officers, we just hired 6 new officers, increase of 3 spots, 3 new officers, 3 lateral transfers. How? We support our cops. And I would guarantee that if that's a police department of 23 officers, they don't get paid anywhere near what the Seattle Police Department gets paid, what the State Patrol gets paid, but they're choosing to work there anyway. Because again, money's important, but it's not everything, especially when your life is on the line. Matt Gilbert, $10 Super Chat. Rich people have school choice. Poor people do not. 100%. Kathy Farler Brockman, the state has wasted so much money ramming DEI down our throats as state employees. 100%. You come in day one, every DEI program, every DEI position goes away across all state agencies that you have control over as governor. Because Dave, I think his DEI answer was appropriate and his real life experience was great. Mm-hmm. I had women, and he didn't even say, but some of them were women of color on his command staff. And it wasn't because of their gender or the color of their skin. It was because at that time, they were the most qualified person for the job. Right. So if you need to be if you need politicians to pass laws so you're not like a racist ass, that the law isn't going to fix that anyway. No law. It's like, oh, can't be racist anymore because Bob Ferguson passed a law about it. No, they're still going to be racist. So I don't get it. Nightwolf, they're going the wrong way with rates. They wouldn't be doing this if their plan was to try to save the economy. And that's what Zach Abraham said as well. TZ Burton, it's your responsibility to build your own wealth. If you work in government as a politician, you are the only ones who should not get rich because of your job. Yeah, and that's the whole thing with the CNN reporter. It's like, you can't if you have a boat, if you have the audacity to have a boat, then you can't care if grocery prices are high.
It's so small-minded because what you're just saying is that he was saying everybody should be able to do better because that makes my business better. That makes that makes us all better when everybody's doing better. But instead she's like, you.
I would also say,
selfish.
If you're from like a waterlogged area, like I grew up in Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes.
You got to have a boat.
A lot of people have boats who weren't rich. So, and you know what, who work hard for it and who managed to maybe save up and buy a pontoon so they could go out partying with their friends. So
did she see what boat he got off of? I mean, there's expensive boats and there's not very expensive
look, if he had a $30 million yacht behind him and he was like, grocery prices are high, I get it, but didn't seem that way.
But again, it affects everybody. Right. Somebody, as a business owner or somebody that invests, it affects everybody somewhere along the line. You can't just demonize a person with money because somewhere along the line, it's going to affect everybody.
Right. And if they're a business owner if he's a business owner and if he's not making money, then he might have to cut jobs or whatever it is. So it's just, he schooled her. I loved it. All right. Nicole, thank you. Actually, Nicole, can you come back on camera?
Oh, sure. Yes, ma'am.
We need to give Nicole a round of applause this week. Okay, everybody? Oh. Nicole's had a hell of a week. I've been running and gunning, doing all sorts of stuff, showing up late, nostril issue, and she's just been absolutely killing it behind the scenes, picking up all my slack. Great week, Nicole.
It's been a good week.
I was going to bring you flowers today, but I didn't have time to stop before work. But like the sentiment's there. So anyway.
Thanks.
Okay, now I'll say goodbye to you.
That counts.
All right. Since I didn't get to this whole censorship story with Gavin Newsom, I thought we folded into our closing sanity check. So there's been some pretty disturbing comments and actions this week on the First Amendment front. So the Gavin Newsom story that we keep not getting to because we go over time, saying that passing a law in California that will criminalize someone who knowingly shares a deep fake of like a political candidate for for instance, slippery slope. And then, of course, we've had statements from Harris. We had the clip from Hillary Clinton, who was on MSNBC this week, saying maybe we should do to American citizens the same thing we did to the Russians in 2016 and prosecute prosecute them for spreading misinformation on social media. It's really scary stuff. It all comes down to who's deciding what misinformation and disinformation is, and it is a slippery slope for us as a country. RFK Jr., who I think has become a beacon of sanity, agrees.
I don't feel at home with people who believe in censorship. I think it's disqualifying. It's antithetical and inconsistent with democracy. And we had Hillary Clinton yesterday making this extraordinary statement that endorsing this censorship of speech in our country. We have Kamala Harris saying that free speech is a privilege. It's not a right. And Tim Walz saying the same thing. And I think that is disqualifying for anybody who wants to be president of the United States to believe in censorship.
100%. And it's also disqualifying for any media outlet that doesn't say the exact same thing. For any media entity that is supposed to be a check on the party in power, that is doing its job because the First Amendment allows them to do so, to not hear those statements, hear those comments from powerful people and immediately call them out as dangerous, that's disqualifying for them as a legitimate media organization. That has been your sanity check for today. That has been today's episode of Undivided. We've got a great episode of Sundays with Subscribers coming up with Olympia mom Alicia Perkins, who has been at the center of exposing some of the problems in America's wokest school district, problems around political and social indoctrination at the expense of learning. She is going to talk to us about that. We're also going to preview a documentary that we're going to be airing next week. So it is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Sign up to support our show to get access to those Sunday episodes. undividedpod.com. It's just $5 a month. undividedpod.com. undividedpod.com. All right, so subscribers, we will see you on Sunday. The rest of you, we'll see you back here on the live show Monday at noon. Beep, beep, beep. That was a turkey. I've done that impression on the show before. My husband thought it was good. Ready? I'm going to get compliments for that. You don't think so, but I will.
Okay.
You want to give it a shot before we go?
No.
Okay. Bye, everyone.